Okay, so part of the restoration project in the cache has some indicators that can see if it's actually functioning as they hoped it would. And one of those would be the bird population. And my students and I have been very interested, particularly in the solitary warblers and the cowbirds, so I took that avenue for my project. And I don't know if it's going to work. Here, and I'll always go. So I had two objectives for this project. The first was to see how the bird communities changed with different succession levels in the restoration project. And secondly, to see if the parasitism, the brood parasitism of the cowbird was affected by this as well. And that was a hopeful. So my hypothesis was that if I went out and I took a bird count at the different successional levels, that I would see specific changes in the species that were there, that would be birds that's their natural habitat. That's where they want to live. And they would come to those areas that were once originally ag land. And I also hoped that as we got into the areas that the restoration was older, the 15 to 20-year-old section, that we would see fewer female cowbirds. So that was my hope. The Cache River watershed currently, the federal land, or the public land, is about 60,000 acres. 30,000 of those right now have restoration projects on them. Trees have been planted there in varying stages. And additionally, there's another 13,500 that are in WRP from Natural Resource Conservation Service. And we're going to look, what my project was looking at the restoration as it from the ag land all the way up to what we call a young forest, and look at these bird populations. Now, the cache was not restored for the birds. Okay? The cache was restored primarily to reduce the sediment that was going into the river. But this is a nice byproduct that we want to look at. So my method, I have lots of these maps, but I just threw two of them up, is picked 5 successional stages. Did ag land, trees that have been planted 0 to 4 years ago, trees that have been planted 5 to 9 years ago, 10 to 14 years ago, and 15 to 20 years ago, which would be a young forest. And then found 4 different sites within the watershed that would have those same characteristics. So I wasn't always looking in the same field, but I had 4 areas that were the same characteristic-wise. And these are just some examples of them. We have ag fields here. They're 1 to 4, 5 to 9. My second map probably has some of the other on there, on 5 to 20. So I have 4 sites for 5 different successional areas, which was 20 sites that we went to. So this is what it was like in the ag site. 0 years. It's pretty easy to spot the birds there. And in looking at the birds, when you do a bird count, it's pretty mathematic. You stand for 6 minutes, and you listen, and you watch, and you do a little bit of both. And fortunately I had Jeff Hoover with me, because I would have probably got a lot of these incorrect. But you listen, and you have to be careful that you're not counting the same bird twice, that they're coming from a different area. And in the ag field, that's actually the easiest one, because they're very visible to be seen, and surprisingly, you can hear a lot. I was really surprised by that. Then, after 6 minutes, you walk about 100 meters, stop again for 6 minutes, and then repeat that for 1 hour. And we did that at each site. This would be our grassline site, 1 to 4 years. Primarily what we would see there was a cover of only about 10% trees. It's not doing real well right now, that time frame. It's mostly mixed herbaceous and broadleaf grasses. The 5 to 9 is a grass and shrub site. It has about a 10 to 35% forest cover. Giving a little credit here to the partnership with the cache, showing you that this was a joint venture, and this restoration project is just really incredible for the amount of acres that they're doing. The shrub site is bird crazy. That's where I had the most different species of birds in that area. Birders, you know, the Jane Hathaway type, they love shrubs. shrub areas because there's so much variety of and species and diversity of the bird population there. However, the purpose of the restoration project is not to maintain shrub areas. This eventually will succeed up into the forest. But for right now, it's a birder's paradise with all the different species that we saw there. I think in this area, I had 21 different bird species. At the ag land, I only had 7, and it worked it out. It's all the way up to 21 was the highest, and then 17 at the young forest. Altogether, I think I recorded close to 37 different species of bird. This is the young forest. This was the oldest. I couldn't get a picture in it, so that's why I'm on the edge of it there, but where a power line separated 2 areas, but you can see that it's pretty much 100% forest cover there. This is a little video. I probably won't play the whole thing, but I'm hoping that you can hear some of the birds that, and you'll probably hear a semi-truck go blasting by too. And it was a little windy that day. I hope this will load. If not, we'll pass. But I was amazed. I've not always been so interested in birds as I am now. I find them fascinating, and it was just so beautiful to be out there in the mornings. And I probably supposed to hit play, but I don't know where it is without being able to see the screen. What do you think? You have to listen real carefully with the wind. You can hear? That's my 0 to 4 year. There's the egg. And basically what you hear are the males. The females just chirp, and the males have their little songs. I had a lot of data. I had a ton of data. And trying to organize it was a challenge, and I'm very thankful that I had Nathan to help me. But basically what we did, and I'm not going to show you all of them, but he took the bird species and my 4 samples at the sites they were at, and the number of birds, the number of times that I was able to hear or see that bird at the site. And then taking that data, was able to graph some information. Now, we pulled some of the species that are very good indicators of the environment. And the grasshopper sparrow, by the way, it's named for that because it's a little chirpy sound that makes like a buzzy sound like a grasshopper. It loves the open grass and weedy meadows. In fact, so much so that if it gets too grown up, if there's too many trees there, it won't even go there. And that's exactly what we found. They were found most in the ag. It liked the early and the medium, the 0 to 4 and the 5 to 9 year, and then it was gone. And that was great. That's exactly what we hoped to find. The American goldfinch, it likes to put its nest in smaller trees and in the edges of the full forest. So you can see that as it grew up, we didn't have any of those in the ag land, but as the small trees were growing, and of course some of these aren't necessarily nesting spots, they're going in there to feed. That's where they're getting the food from. Brown-headed cowbird. Okay. The cowbird, as you've known from my project before, it doesn't make its own nest, and it goes into the forest to parasitize other birds' nests. But they don't like to go in deep. They don't like to go in deep in the forest. So, but they do feed in the ag land. So you'll find a lot of them in the cornfields. They're feeding there. But this is, even though this chart may look a little confusing to you, this is really good information because it means that when there being fewer in the young forest and probably even fewer in the deep forest, this is causing a protection for those bird communities. So they're not going in quite so far as we can close up that forest fragmentation by the restoration project. Hopefully it will allow there to be fewer and fewer spots for the cowbird to go, meaning they're just on the edges, they're just on the fringe instead of taking over everything. So this was really happy information. I'm really glad about that. And the Acadian flycatcher, once again, another fussy bird. It really only likes the woods, and we didn't find any of those in the ag, early, or medium stages. So these indicators of these particular species were very positive for our project. So my conclusion is the restoration that you see in different stages here to go back to a bottomland forest should continue. It's right on target, at least with the avian community. Seems to be very, very successful. And hopefully, a lot of the remaining 30,000 acres, when the funding is available, will be continued to be restored. Future studies, this really, I know my students are going to love this next year, this blowfly. One of the things that they've been finding in the nests, of the nest boxes of orthonotary warblers that we've been studying, is that the blowfly is laying its eggs in these nests. And the eggs hatch into a larva state. They come up and they take a little blood meal. They will suck on the fledglings and then drink for a little bit, get a little snack, and then drop back down and repeat that several times until they go into a pupa stage and then hatches a fly and repeat it. But what's really interesting, several things. One is their favorite flavor seems to be cowbird fledglings. Because even in a nest that has orthonotary warblers and cowbirds, you'll find twice as many of the blowfly larvae attached to the cowbird than you do attached on the orthonotary warbler. Another study with this is, even though it sounds horrible, the birds, if they are healthy, meaning if there's enough food supply, they're being fed by their mother well enough, then they should be able to withstand that. It's kind of like us and ticks. Okay, we can take it, we'll survive. However, if they're not healthy, if they're sickly, this is going to add to, to their mortality rate. And maybe that's a good thing, you're keeping the sick ones down. However, when you have bad years like this year, where there's not enough food for the birds anyway, and the mortality rate's going to be great, this is going to be a huge, huge effect in there. So the study with the blowflies, I think, is something that I'm interested in. I think my students would be interested in it as well. It's not only in these particular nests, in fact, it's throughout the entire United States, but right here in the cache, this is a local area that they could study some of this information. And I'd like to thank Jeff Hoover, who definitely helped me with this project majorly, with the identification of the birds, and Nathan Soley, who helped me greatly with my information and my data and helped me to organize it. And I really like this quote, "A bird does not sing because it has an answer, it sings because it has a song."